Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And with this film, it's pretty appropriate due to the weather we just had recently and the fact that the sequel is coming out this week. But today I'm doing a viewer request for the film from 1996, Twister. Also, a little funny side note is anyone who lives in Illinois probably knows that a few days ago it got pretty stormy and there was definitely some tornado sirens going around. Well, while I was watching this film to get ready to do my review, the tornado sirens actually went off nearby. That's a very different, all new immersive experience while watching this film. Here is the trivia question for today. What movie is playing on the big screen when the tornado hits the drive in? The answer will be at the end of this episode. So, in this film, we meet Bill Harding and his fiancee Melissa as they are on their way to go meet Bill's ex, Joe, and try to get her to finalize the divorce papers. Now, Bill used to be a storm chaser, and this is what Joe and the rest of her team still do. It's actually due to Joe's childhood that she got into this, as at a very young age, she, her father, and her mother went into their storm cellar to try and get away from an F5 tornado. But unfortunately, it managed to pull and rip her father out of there, and so ever since then, she's been obsessed with studying them. So Bill and Joe have an interesting relationship, as there does seem to still be something there, but at the same time, they also can't seem to stand each other. Now, while Bill is trying to get Joe to sign the papers, he discovers that Joe and her team managed to actually complete an idea that he came up with, which is something called Dorothy, where it actually releases a bunch of small computers into a tornado and might be able to register and get information from what actually happens within it. Now, as it turns out, Jonas, who is a bit of a rival for both Bill and Joe, has decided to steal that idea for technology and is going to try to attempt to do this himself. So, even though Bill thought he was done with being a storm chaser, it appears that he's being pulled back into it. And so now he, Joe, their team, and even Melissa are now off to chase some tornadoes and hopefully be the first team to actually use this new technology. So, will either team be able to accomplish getting the equipment in and getting themselves out without getting sucked up? This movie was directed by Jan de Bont. Some of the other possibilities for director for this film were Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, Tim Burton, John Carpenter, James Cameron, and John Badham. This movie was written by Michael Crichton and his wife Anne Marie Martin, which at the time this was the single most expensive screenplay as they paid $2 million for it. The original tagline for the film was "It sucks," but they quickly realized the audience could turn that on the production very easily. If you didn't know, Twister was the first movie released on DVD and the last movie released on HD DVD. Bill Paxton plays the character of Bill Harding in this film, and he did a great job. But the role originally was offered to Tom Hanks. He ended up turning it down, but suggested his Apollo 13 co star, Bill Paxton. Other actors that were also up for the role were Mel Gibson, Kevin Costner, Dennis Quaid, John Travolta, Richard Gere, John Cusack, Nicolas Cage, Bruce Willis, Val Kilmer, Kurt Russell, and Michael Keaton. When Paxton unfortunately passed away in 2017, Spotter Network choreographed 200 storm chasers to spell out BP with GPS tracker blips on a radar display. This kind of tribute had been done 5 times before, but only for actual storm chasers. Helen Hunt is who Jane DeBont originally did want as the character of Joe, but she wasn't the only actress up for the role, as Laura Dern was also up for it. Hunt, by the way, was actually injured during the truck driving through the cornfield scene near the end of the film. The car door hit her in the back of the head. For later shots, they ended up wedging it open. Philip Seymour Hoffman plays the character of Dusty, and apparently a lot of his characterization was attributed to Hoffman's choices. Now, other actors that were also up for that role were Garth Brooks, Mark Cuban, and Chris Farley. The character of Jonas is played by Cary Elwes, and originally it was going to be a much bigger role. Now, they offered it to Christopher McDonald at first, but he turned it down to do the movie Happy Gilmore, which I'm glad he did because I can't imagine anyone else as Shooter McGavin. Now, other actors that were also offered the role were Alec Baldwin, Peter Green, and Hugh Laurie. The role of Melissa is played by Jamie Gertz, but it was also offered to Mira Sorvino. Steven Spielberg was the executive producer for this movie, and it was actually his idea to unalive the father at the beginning of the film to establish the danger of tornadoes and to create Joe's obsession. There were actually three script doctors brought in for this film. None of them were credited in the movie, and these were Joss Whedon, Steve Zalian, and Jeff Nathanson. Throughout the film, there are 8 tornadoes. Now, the sound that they used for the tornadoes was actually a slowed down camel's moan. The famous flying CGI cow is actually a CGI zebra that was just reskinned from the movie Jumanji. Since they ended up dealing with a lot of days that had sunshine, this caused issues, and they would actually flood scenes with high intensity Klieg lights. Now, unfortunately, as a result, this caused minor retinal burns for both Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton. The way that they generated the wind for a majority of the scenes was with a Boeing 707 jet engine. There were apparently so many cans of hairspray used throughout this movie, as they were trying to keep everyone's hair looking good in the scenes that didn't have tornadoes. This movie became pretty famous in theaters worldwide, as it was known for blowing out surround sound speakers. The device called Dorothy is an homage to a similar device used for tornado research called Totable Tornado Observatory, or as they called it, Toto. So both of these are actually references towards The Wizard of Oz due to the cyclone that appears in the film. The house that's still standing at the end of the film in the original script was supposed to be destroyed, but Hardin County, Iowa Historical Society and many of its citizens refused to let that house be demolished. It is now a tourist attraction, with the rest of the area left looking as it did in the film. This movie was filmed in Ontario, Canada, California, Texas, Iowa, and Oklahoma. And speaking of Oklahoma, filming actually had to be briefly delayed due to the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Also, Wakita, Oklahoma, which is mentioned and shown in the film, is actually a real place, and located there you can find the Twister Movie Museum. So, with a film with such a destructive force, there's actually only a confirmed 3 body count: Joe's father, and then Jonas and Eddie, who decide to be really dumb and drive right towards the tornado. Here's something that's fascinating but is not actually confirmed to be true. Twister and the Abyss might be in the same universe, as at one point you can actually see a benthic petroleum semi truck flying towards them in Twister, and that's actually the same company that Ed Harris's crew works for in the Abyss. Now, I don't know if Universal Studios is still doing this, but at one point they had the Twister Ride It Out experience, which I remember going to when I was much younger and thought it was a ton of fun. Now, as I also mentioned near the beginning of this episode, there's also the sequel, Twisters, which comes out this week. Now, I also have a random question for everyone out there. Do you, in fact, consider disaster movies horror movies, or are they completely separate? So, when it comes to the film Twister, I love this one. To me, this is the Jurassic Park of disaster films. Although, I guess you could kind of also consider Jurassic Park a disaster film as well. But anyway, I really like the fact that with this one, the graphics looked amazing. I liked the characters, I liked the story, so I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 5. Now, if you liked Twister, other movies I recommend checking out are Geostorm, The Day After Tomorrow, Into the Storm, and The Perfect Storm. Now it's time for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. What movie is playing on the big screen when the tornado hits the drive-in? So the movie that's up on the big screen is The Shining. And the reason why The Shining and Psycho are the 2 movies playing at the drive-in is due to the fact that Warner Brothers and Universal Pictures are the ones who made Twister. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.